Okay. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is our final session of Hermeneutics 101 that we've been doing for over a year. And we finally made it to the final book of the Bible, which is the book of Revelation. I'd originally thought about doing a session on Daniel and Revelation. There's just too much content. It would be 2 hours long. It'd be just very, very difficult to do. So I kind of assume that Revelation is really uh, more of the difficult and controversial book when it comes to the Bible. There's just a lot of interest in it. You tend to find people will either be super, super interested in it, as in like it's the only thing they want to read and the only thing they want to hear sermons on, or they're super scared and they don't want to read it or they don't want to hear anything about it at all. Probably where we need to be is somewhere in the middle to where it's something that's valuable, but it's one of the other 27 books of the New Testament. And it's not something that we're afraid of. It's something that we can approach confidently and we can attempt to make sense of what's actually being said there. And you might not be able to get all of the details, but what I want to do is I want to be able to help people understand the type of genre the book of Revelation is, which is a genre called apocalyptic, which also is shared with the book of Daniel, particularly the second half of Daniel, which is chapters 7 through 12. But then I want to give people enough of an understanding of the book of Revelation that they can engage it with some confidence and they can make sense of it and they can draw out of it practical application for their lives, even though it was written to seven churches at the end of the first century. It is something that if you can understand what's being said, it can help motivate your Christian life and help you to be a faithful Christ follower and to be the kind of person that Christ wants you to be, regardless of whenever you're reading it, whether it's 2025 or whenever you're watching this video. So I want to give people the tools so they can do that. So let's begin. So we're just going to be looking at, of course, how to read Revelation, but a lot of these tips are going to help you to read the book of Daniel as well. So the book of Revelation, of course, is called the Apocalypse of John. I'm just going to refer to him as John of Patmos, just for the sake of the argument, because we can all agree he's a John who was on the island of Patmos. I'm not particularly convinced that he is John, the author of the Gospel of John, who is John the Apostle, the son of Zebedee. That doesn't really matter so much because nothing that I'm saying right now is actually going to matter on who wrote it. We're just going to call him John of Patmos. But he wrote something called an apocalypse. An apocalypse, or at least in Greek, the apocalypsis, just means revelation. It's an unveiling, it's a revealing. So we have the book of Revelation, but also the literary genre of Daniel and Revelation is also called apocalyptic or an apocalypse. So you have kind of the genre, and then you also have the title given to the final book of the New Testament canon. So let's actually define what an apocalypse is. So basically, if you read any commentary on the book of Revelation, they're going to give you this particular definition, which has been basically established as the standard definition. So what is an apocalypse? So John Collins, in his third edition of the Apocalyptic Imagination, says that an apocalypse is a genre of revelatory literature with a narrative framework in which a revelation is mediated by an otherworldly being to a human recipient, disclosing a transcendent reality which is both temporal, insofar as it envisages eschatological salvation, and spatial, insofar as it involves another supernatural world. Okay, that's a lot of big fancy words. So let's just make sure that we understand what those words are. Okay, so it is revelatory literature. What does that mean? Well, it means it's literature that's going to unveil truths from God's perspective that might not be ordinarily perceived by human beings. Take, for example, in the book of Daniel, particularly like Daniel chapter 10, to where you have nations that are fighting against each other. And Daniel reveals that the reason why these nations are fighting against each other is because there are angels up in heaven that are actually battling it out. And the angels are representative of these various nations. So that's not something you could perceive by yourself. It's just something that the revelatory literature is going to reveal to you. It's almost like, the heavens are opening and you're actually seeing what's actually going on in heaven, and how that actually has some bearing as to, interestingly enough, it always deals with conflicts that are going on in our culture right now. Okay, why is it the people of God are suffering? Well, revelatory literature, apocalyptic literature is going to explain that to you by showing uh, how God sees it from his perspective, which is his perspective in heaven. Um, Apocalyptic literature has a narrative framework. This is super important, okay? Because a lot of people have been told on the internet that Daniel and Revelation are just these coded in times timelines that if you could just get the right decoder ring and you can explain all of the hidden codes and symbols, then you can figure out and you can plot on your calendar that you have hanging up on your wall when Jesus is going to come back or whenever there's going to be World War III or something like that. That's not the definition that these scholarly experts are coming up with. They're saying that there is a narrative framework. That's really important. What is a narrative? Well, it's a story with a storyteller about characters with a plot. Okay, we get that. We see that. You know what else has a narrative framework? The Gospels, the book of Acts. Okay, you have a story with the beginning and an end, and you've got the protagonist or multiple protagonists, and you have antagonists. And Revelation, of course, is written in that way. So recognizing that it's a narrative helps us to see, okay, how does it start? How does it have a middle? How does it conclude? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? And am I, as a reader, am I aligning myself with the winners or am I aligning myself with the losers? That's a pretty basic way that I think we should be thinking about how to interpret Revelation. It's mediated. Because God, of course, is not speaking directly to Daniel. God, of course, is not speaking directly to John of Patmos. They're mediated by these revealers, these heavenly revealers. So in Revelation, we see that the visions are mediated by angels, but also by Jesus. And even Jesus says that he sends his own angel. In the book of Daniel, it's just by angels because Jesus is not born yet. He's not in existence yet. So he's not able to be there to mediate those visions. But that's one of the key differences of apocalyptic literature and just prophetic literature. Apocalyptic literature is prophetic literature, but prophetic literature by itself is not necessarily mediated by these mediating figures like heavenly angels or Jesus. Typically, prophetic literature is just the word of Yahweh comes to Isaiah, the word of Yahweh comes to Jeremiah, the word of Yahweh comes to Ezekiel, and then these prophets are filled with the word of the Lord and they speak it forth. Okay, you don't have that sort of language in Daniel and Revelation. So they are prophetic, Daniel and Revelation, but they're apocalyptic, which is kind of this extra level of the prophetic works. And we also see reality. It talks about different ways of reality. It talks about eschatological reality, which is juxtaposed on the axis of kind of the present evil age, in which there's already the victory of Christ that's broken in. We call that the already or the inaugurated eschatology, the kingdom of God that is in some sense already broken into the present. But then we have the not yet, the consummation, the future kingdom of God, which is very important to many Christians. So there's kind of the eschatological reality. And then there's a spatial reality, which is kind of like heaven above, which is God's realm, and everything that's going on there is in control of God. And then we have kind of the earth below, which is not typically described in apocalyptic literature as like the earth, meaning the third rock from the sun. The earth is the realm that's in need of redemption. So you got heaven above, which is God's realm. The earth below is the realm of rebellion. And of course, it's in need of redemption. So that, of course, is going to be important. I mean, so I'll give you an example. In Revelation, there's a lot of beasts, but there's a bad beast that first gets introduced in chapter 11, verse 7. And I think there it describes the beast that is coming up out of the abyss. He's coming up out of the abyss. And that's not meant to be located on a map. You can't go to Google Maps and find, like, show me the abyss. Okay, it's meant to be more of an identification. If you see a beast, excuse me, that is coming up out of an abyss, that means that it is identified with the abyss, which is kind of another word for the chaotic seas. It's a bad, evil, negative, chaotic image. Okay, to where, like in Daniel 7, you have the Son of Man that comes, on the clouds of heaven. That, of course, is a positive image because the clouds of heaven is, of course, heaven being God's realm. And so You could have the beast that's coming up out of the abyss in Revelation 11, verse 7. He's also in chapter 13, verse 1, the beast that comes up out of the sea. Notice how the sea and the abyss are just kind of similar descriptions of chaotic evil. Again, we're thinking, what do these images mean? How do they function? That's kind of one of the spatial elements that we have to kind of consider. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to chapter 21, where we actually see the bride of Christ descending from heaven. And you need to ask yourself if that means that there's going to be a woman that's going to fall out from the sky. I think that's probably reading the imagery a little bit too literally, but it's something to consider. Again, if something is coming out of heaven, it means it's from God, it's identified with God, it's good, it's holy, it's righteous. Something that's coming up out of the sea and coming up from the abyss is a negative image. It's a bad image. So that's kind of the spatial way in which this imagery is going to describe itself. Okay, so I want to kind of start off with the very first verse, because I think if you miss some of the key things in the opening verse, you're going to be lost reading the book of Revelation. So the most important thing that I want to point out is this verb communicated. So in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, it says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show to his bondservants the things which must soon take place. And he sent and communicated it by his angel to his bondservant John. Okay. This translation communicated is not as clear as it could be. Okay. Because the verb is esimanin, which is actually the verb to signify. To signify. There's a related noun that's used in the Gospel of John that means sign, S-I-G-N. So this is the verb to sign, namely to signify. And to signify something means to communicate something with signs and symbols. And so you can see the English translation communicated it is not very clear, because it's actually telling you how Revelation is going to communicate its message. Revelation is going to communicate the message that God gave to Jesus, that ultimately he wants to give to his bondservant John, to give to the 7 churches, which were written down, which we're now reading about today. He wants to communicate that through signs and symbols. That's really important. So we should recognize that there are going to be a lot of signs. There can be a lot of symbols, and we have to figure out and discern, what do those signs mean? What do those symbols mean? But you can see just the translation communicated doesn't quite convey that it's communicating with signs and symbols. It just sounds like I'm communicating to you verbally. It's much deeper than that. Okay, so that it's one of those, like, it's unfortunate because the English doesn't tell us everything we need to hear. But again, it's a pretty clear thing. We can sit there and look at the Greek. Okay, I got to pick up the pace because we have a lot more to go over. All right, so if Revelation is going to communicate things to us through symbols, we need to try to figure out what some of those symbols are. So let's talk about some of the symbols in the Apocalypse of John. So, as the famous saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Sometimes an image or a thought can be difficult to convey in a written medium. So Revelation, of course, has a bunch of signs that John of Patmos saw in his vision, in his visions, in his visionary trance, and he's got to find a way to write all that stuff down. He's got to find a way to take everything that he saw, everything that he witnessed, everything that he experienced, and write it down. That's difficult to do. Okay, so in light of this understandable difficulty, apocalyptic works like Daniel and Revelation convey their visionary experiences with several common traits. So the first trait that's going to be heavily apparent, especially in Revelation, but it's also there in Daniel, are comparative words such as like and as. Like and as. Okay, so we have 2 of them in Revelation, the Greek words omios and os, which appear 21 and 71 times respectively. So that's 92 times you have comparative words in Revelation. So it's not saying that Jesus is a lamb, because Jesus is a human being. He's not an animal. The lamb is something that is a comparative way of showing that Jesus is a sacrificial figure. He's a Passover figure. He's a redemptive figure. He's a kind of a not a powerful figure in the sense of military might. So these comparative words help to convey the things that John had experienced through various signs and symbols. Revelation, of course, is going to use this sort of comparative language like and as more than any other New Testament book. Let me give you some examples. Chapter 1, verse 14. His head, Christ's head, and his hair were white like white wool, like snow, and his eyes were like a flame of fire. Okay? Doesn't mean that his hair was wool, like snow, and that his eyes were on fire. These are just comparative ways of describing what's actually there. And it kind of puts the text in three dimensions. In chapter 1, verse 15, his feet were like burnished bronze when it had been made to glow in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of many waters. Chapter 3, verse 3. This is to the church in Sardis. So remember what you have received and heard, and keep it, and repent. Therefore, if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you do not know what hour I will come to you. Okay. Luckily, Jesus had used this terminology in the Synoptic Gospels, particularly in the Olivet Discourse. We also see it in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, if I'm not mistaken. So it's Jesus going to come like a thief. Okay, he's not really a thief. He's not going to come and rob you, but he's going to come like someone that you're not expecting. Okay. Revelation chapter 6, verse 1. Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures saying, as with a voice of thunder, come. So this is that same comparative word, the word, I think it's the word homios, but it gets translated as with a voice of thunder. It could just be translated as like, and probably some of the translations will translate it that way. So again, we're seeing this. You should expect it, and it's in a lot of apocalyptic literature. You can also find a little bit of this in some of the prophetic literature, like Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 1 has a lot of this sort of like language because it has a vision in which supposedly Ezekiel sees God himself, but he qualifies it. He's like, well, I saw something that was like this. It was like this. It was like this. So Ezekiel, not wanting to give the impression that he actually was able to see God, qualifies it with a lot of these like sort of words. Okay. So we've seen the comparative words like or as. The second symbol that Revelation is going to use, and also Daniel, is going to be colors. Colors, colors, colors. Okay. Now, a lot of these colors, it's pretty easy for me to show you. I think you're going to see these, and you're going to nod your head, and you're going to say, yeah, I'm able to read through Revelation and able to see how this works. Okay. And colors are important, even in our culture. Because when I'm driving down the road and I get to the intersection, I'm looking to see not whether there's a big sign that says go, yield, and stop. I'm looking for a big sign to see, is there a green light, is there a yellow light, or is there a red light? And you don't have to tell me what those colors mean. I just know because we live in a culture to where those colors are used and they have meaning and value. Okay. Same thing in the book of Revelation. So white, of course, is a color that's going to describe God in his realm. It's a color of victory. It's a color of resurrection, which is certainly a word for victory. Purity, and of course, the godly being associated with God, they're going to be clothed in white. Here's some examples. Chapter 3, verse 4. But you, those in Sardis, have a few people in Sardis, I should have just kept reading, who have not soiled their garments, but they will walk in me in white, for they are worthy. Okay, so you can see that white, of course, is a good color. It's the color of their clothing because they are worthy and they have not soiled their garments. Okay, in chapter 6, verse 11, and there was given to each of them a white robe. So they were told to rest a little while longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed even as they had been would be completed also. So this is a description of martyrs. And we can see that if they're clothed with white, then it means that, of course, that God has identified them as the godly. They are pure. They have been victorious in their preaching that has led to their martyrdom. They have not yet been raised from the dead because they're told to rest a little bit longer, using one of the words which means to rest and sleep in the grave. Okay. Chapter 7, verse 9. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation, tribes, and people and tongue, standing before the throne, before the Lamb. And guess what? They are clothed in white. White robes, palm branches were in their hands, okay? So this is not an image of judgment in which a bunch of unrighteous people that are about to be annihilated are standing before the throne. These are people clothed in white. meaning that they're worthy. That means that they're righteous. Okay. Red, a color that means violent power or blood. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this only appears a couple of times in Revelation. But I think the word for red, the adjective, is actually pyros. We get pyros or pyrotechnic. So this is why it's not just a normal red. It's kind of like a fiery red. So in chapter 6, verse 4, I saw a red horse, again, a fiery horse. It went out to him who sat on it, was granted to take peace from the earth, so that men would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. Okay? So just by being described as a rider on a fiery red horse should already tell you this is not a positive image. And of course, you can see that he takes peace from the earth. That's not a good thing. In order that people would kill one another, and a great sword was given to him. Again, this is not a positive image. That same red word appears in the description of the dragon. Chapter 12, verse 3, then I saw, so then another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon. Again, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns. On his heads were 7 diadems. Again, the color itself should identify what's being described. It's not a positive image, and it's certainly not a neutral image. This is a negative, violent image. Okay? Purple and scarlet means extravagance, extravagant decadence. It's also used to describe empire and also imperial evil. So it's, people tend to think that, well, people that have a lot of money, that are rich, that might be a positive thing. And actually, you could try to make some verses in Proverbs that actually would indicate that, the righteous people are going to be blessed by God and they're going to be rich. But Revelation is saying that, at least in this context, those that are wearing purple and scarlet are not blessed by God. That is an overabundance, extravagance, and typically describing evil in dealing with the empire. In chapter 17, verse 3, it says, then he, an angel, carried me, John, away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So you've got some sort of woman that is sitting on an overly extravagant beast that is associated with an empire that is not the empire of God. Okay? Same woman, which is described as a city at the end of Revelation chapter 17. The angel says, woe, woe, the great city, she who was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. Okay? This is not a positive image. This is overabundance, extravagance, decadence in a way that God does not approve of. Black, not the absence of light, unless you're kind of reading that theologically. Black is typically used to describe death and disaster. So again, notice kind of the opposite of kind of the white color, death and disaster. And again, just look at how it's used. Here's the black horse. Revelation chapter 6, verse 5. When he broke the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature saying, come. I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hands. And the scales actually take very common, basic items, and it makes them super, super expensive, but it doesn't do that to the oil or the wine, if I'm not mistaken. So this brings economic disaster, which is what this horse is doing. In chapter 6, verse 12, I looked, and behold, he broke the 6th seal. There's a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth made with hair. This is not a positive image. Okay, and this is a negative image that is drawn not only from the Old Testament and not only from the teachings of Jesus, but even in the wider Greco-Roman world, when there was some sort of eclipse and the sun turned black, they all interpreted that as a bad omen. That was a bad, terrible thing. So here, black is being used as a negative image that is describing some sort of disaster that is about to take place. Okay? Pale green. Sometimes it just can be translated as green. And this seems to refer to death in the sense that when a body has died, it turns green. And so it kind of has that sort of pale green death look. But also it's just used kind of in a neutral way to refer to just vegetation. And again, the context is going to make it clear which is being used. So here's another one of these riders. Chapter 6, verse 8. I looked and behold a pale green horse. He who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Probably not a good image. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with famine, with pestilence, and by the wild beast of the earth. Again, this is an image describing someone who has died. Again, so this is not just green and like, oh, green, beautiful grass. This is kind of a negative green image. However, it does appear in chapter 9, verse 4, to just kind of simply mean neutral vegetation. So you kind of have to let the context decide what it means. They were told to not hurt the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, nor any tree, but only the men who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. Okay? So I don't think this is saying, nor any green thing, namely the green things that we just read in this fourth rider in chapter 6, verse 8. It just seems, again, in the context to be a neutral image. And that's one of the difficult things about Revelation is that sometimes you have to be just very, very careful and subtle with how you interpret it. And over-interpreting things usually is going to lead to some sort of disaster, lead to some sort of black color. Gold, probably to tell you this, wealth, beauty, royalty, either real royalty or false royalty. And again, you can just kind of see how this works. So in chapter 4, verse 4, around the heavenly throne were 24 thrones, and upon the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed with white garments, and golden crowns were on their heads. Okay? Now, this is a positive image because we've already seen by the time you've been reading chapter 4 that in chapters 2 through 3 that you have promises that are made to Christians, that Christians are going to sit on thrones, and they're going to be given white garments, and they're going to be given golden crowns upon their heads. Okay, so this is, hey, these are this is a victorious image of people that have actually obeyed the mandates in Revelation chapters 2 through 3. So you're hopefully, as an attuned reader, you have picked up on those things and you see what's actually being said here. So the golden crowns here, these are positive images for Christians who have conquered and been faithful and who have overcome in their life. However, it's not always a positive image because look at the person upon whom it's crowned here in chapter 17. The woman, clothed with purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and the unclean things of her immorality. Okay? So she's got gold, so there's some sort of appearance of royalty, but it's not real, it's not going to last, and it's not given by God. To where the gold crowns are, of course, awarded by God or by God's agent, the Lamb. Okay, so we've talked about comparative words. We've talked about colors. Let's just talk about, again, specific images and symbols, okay? And what I constantly try to convey, at least to my college undergraduates when I teach Revelation, is that we have images and symbols in our culture all the time, and we're so familiar with them and we use them. And so if we could just figure out what these images meant to first century readers that lived in Asia Minor, that are influenced by the Jewish culture, the Hebrew Bible, and also by early Christianity, then we can make sense of what's actually going on in Revelation. In every culture, we have symbols. Some of them are powerful, and some of them actually are more powerful than just simple words. So in Revelation, we're going to have Jewish images. Okay, so here's one, chapter 5, verse 5. One of the elders said to me, John of Patmos, "Stop weeping. Behold, the lion that is from the tribe of Judah, the shoot of David, has overcome so as to open the book and its 7 seals." So it's using some Jewish imagery here to describe Jesus. He is the lion from the tribe of Judah. That, of course, is drawing from Genesis chapter 49, verses 8 through 10. And he is the shoot of David. He's the offspring of David. That, of course, is drawing from the Davidic covenant of 2 Samuel 7, more specifically from Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, where the shoot of David is David's offspring. So here we have a descendant of Judah and a descendant of David, and he has conquered. That gives him the ability to open the scroll and its 7 seals. So Revelation, of course, is going to draw on those Jewish images, and it's not going to explain them. It assumes that you, the reader, knows them. And so if you don't know them, you're going to be lost. So hopefully you have a good study Bible that's able to kind of give you some good footnotes on those things. The next verse gives another one. I saw between the throne with the 4 living creatures and the elders a lamb standing as if slain. So now we have another image. We have a lamb, a sacrificial Passover lamb, and he is standing up, which is a symbol of victory, but he's also slain, indicating his crucifixion. So you have a lamb who is simultaneously alive and dead. He's embodying in himself the death and the resurrection, and he's described here with a different animal. He's described as the lion. Now he's described as the lamb, and I think throughout Revelation he's just going to be continued to describe as the lamb, no longer as the lion. So those are Jewish images that are there in the book of Revelation. It's also going to use Roman imperial images, and of course, in the first century world, they lived in the Greco-Roman world. They'd be familiar with the images of Rome and Rome's empire, which was massive and expansive, and it's always in the background of anything that you read in the New Testament, because Rome is just kind of the boogeyman that's just always just back there in the context. So in Revelation chapter 2, verse 10, Jesus says, "Be faithful unto death, and I'm going to give you the crown of life." Okay. Well, crowns were awarded by the Romans to various client kings. And now Jesus is saying, okay, but I'm going to be the one that's going to give you the crown of life. It's not necessarily a Jewish image. It's actually more of a Roman image. Chapter 11, verse 7, when they had finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss, this is what I was mentioning earlier. Again, not a good beast. It's not like the lion and the lamb. Those are good beasts. Here's a bad beast. This beast from the abyss is going to make war with the Christians, and he's going to conquer them and kill them. Okay, so obviously Rome knew a whole lot about conquering the world, at least the world in which Rome was in charge of. Even in the first century, the borders of the Roman Empire kept growing and growing and growing depending on which emperor was in charge. So conquering, of course, from a military standpoint, is certainly a Roman imperial image. And then, of course, in chapter 13, verse 1, where you have the very same beast. Notice here it's actually coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. The Roman emperors were known for having several blasphemous names from the perspective of Judaism and Christianity. They would call, of course, their emperor God, high priest, savior, son of God, Lord, all these titles, some of which you would say probably belong to Jesus, but prior to Jesus even being born, they were calling the Emperor Augustus God and Savior, and lots of names that early Christians would not feel very comfortable ascribing to this guy that is ruling Rome. Okay, so again, we have images in our culture. I don't have to tell you what this means. Okay, so of course, green means go, red means stop, and yellow means, well, it depends on if there's a cop there. Okay. But you know what I mean. So again, we have these images in our culture, and we don't have to explain what they mean because they're so common. Okay. If you saw this behind you while you're driving, that means something. It means please pull over safely to the side of the road. Okay. It doesn't mean, hey, let's race. That's definitely not what it means. Okay. This is an image that for a lot of people has a positive meaning. For some people, it has some ambivalent negative meaning to it. Here's an image, too, that 5 years ago, hardly anyone in America knew what this meant. This is the Ukraine flag. Okay, so it's an image that makes a lot more sense now, but 5, 10, 15 years ago, this image would not have been readily recognizable to many people. Okay, here's this interesting image. I still find people that think that this is Moses' staff, where there is a snake on it. Okay. But this, of course, you're going to see on the back of an ambulance, or you're going to see it at a hospital. But it actually is drawn from this character right here, which is Asclepius. And Asclepius had various temples in the Greco-Roman world. To my knowledge, there are 2 Asclepius temples. They're actually in cities, in 2 of the 7 cities to which Revelation was actually written. And Asclepius was the god of healing, so he would have temples that have a lot of hot springs, and you would go there and you would pay money to this god, and the various priests would put you in these hot springs, and you would, supposedly get better by these sort of natural healing ways. Okay, but you can see there, he's got that image of the staff with that image of the snake. And if you ask historians, hospital historians, they would tell you that that image of the snake on the stick actually comes from Asclepius, the ancient god of healing. Okay, they're not going to say it comes from Moses. Okay, so a lot of people don't know that, but it is interesting that The original readers of Revelation would have known exactly what that image would have meant because they would have been living in cities, or at least by cities that had temples dedicated to Asclepius. Okay, another important image here. This is the goddess Nike. Her other name is called Victoria. We actually get the word victory. So you have Nike and victory. And what does she have there? She has wings, but she also has a wreath, a laurel wreath that she would crown to her victors. And of course, we have Nike today, which literally is taking the name from this goddess. She's called the goddess Nike and attributing it to shoes so that those who wear it are going to be victorious. Okay. I'm not saying that Nike shoes are some sort of idolatrous shoes or anything like that. I'm just saying that they've drawn from this imagery of understanding that Nike means victory. Okay. Here's an interesting image. So this is a coin that I believe was minted in the year 79. Okay. And so we have an image of the Roman emperor here, and I believe this is Vespasian. Vespasian was the emperor in the year 70, I think from the year 70 to 79. And on the other image, you have the goddess Roma, okay, who's a woman, and she is actually sitting on 7 mountains. I'm going to make sure that we can see all these right here. So we've got 1, got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And so she's sitting on 7 mountains or 7 hills. Okay. This is a type of coin that you would potentially have in your pocket if you were reading the book of Revelation initially. And then you've got this little image here in Revelation chapter 17, verse 9, where it says, "Here is the mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits." My point is that every single original reader of Revelation would have known exactly what this means. They would know that a woman who sits on 7 hills is the goddess Roma, who is sitting on the 7 hills, the 7 geographical hills upon which the city of Rome is actually founded. I mean, you could go to Rome right now and you could walk on all 7 of those hills. That is a well-known, identifiable geographical point of Rome that was not debated to anybody. Now, I do need to make this point because there have been some people that have said that the evil empire in the book of Revelation is not actually Rome. They think it's Jerusalem. And they'll say, well, look, Jerusalem is actually founded on 7 hills. It's not. It's not. You can go to Jerusalem. It's founded on 1 hill, which is Mount Zion. They'll say that the Mount of Olives is one of those hills. It's not, because you can go to the Mount of Olives and you look over and you see Jerusalem. So again, I'm just kind of anticipating some arguments here. And I'm just saying it just doesn't work. Okay. They would have known exactly what this means. And what I typically find is that readers of Revelation will read Revelation chapter 17, verse 9, and they'll have no idea what this means. It's not meant to give you some sort of coded message about 7 mountains and the woman. It's meant to tell you something that the reader would have been well aware of. It would be super obvious. And in fact, they probably, as they were reading Revelation, would have already had coins like this in their own pocket. And there are several ancient Greek and Latin writers and historians and geographers that will constantly describe Rome as a city that's built on 7 hills. It was a widely understood and explained geographical feature of that particular city. Okay, so I really got to make that point because you got to put your tent pegs down somewhere. You got to build your argument on something. And I think let's build it by putting it in the context of the Greco-Roman first century world. Okay, here's an image. All right, this is not chocolate fudge. Okay. All right, this is an image. Again, this is an image that I don't think people would have used 10 years ago, but it's an image that we understand in our culture today. Here's another image. Okay. Is this person jumping up and celebrating and dancing? No, he's not. You know what I mean? You don't have to know any more about what this sign means. You just know that the sign typically means wet floor. Okay, potential slipping hazard. The point is, we've got all sorts of images in our culture right now that don't have to be explained to you. And in the first century world, they had images as well, and they would have made sense to them. And so we have to look at the images and we have to ask the historical question, how would these images have been understood by readers in the first century that were influenced by the Jewish culture, the Greco-Roman culture, the Hebrew Bible, and by their own Asia Minor first century environment? Those are the historical questions we have to ask. But if we're going to bring our modern understanding of what these symbols might mean, then we're going to be reading into the text anachronistically. And we don't want to do that. You've got to do a little bit of work, got to do a little bit of history, got to do a little bit of homework. And again, ask the question, how would these symbols and signs have been understood by first century Christians living in Asia Minor? That's the question we got to ask. Because I'm actually convinced, this is going to, hopefully this isn't radical. I actually believe that Revelation was written in a way that the original readers could understand 100% of it. I don't believe that it was written to confuse them or to hide truths from them that you just need some sort of super prophecy expert from the 21st century to explain them to you. I think that they understood them and that it gave them meaning and purpose. And because of that, they cherished the book of Revelation. They valued it. They kept it. They preserved it. And they copied it. And they spread it around to other people because they understood its message. If they didn't understand the message, they wouldn't have preserved it and copied it and shared it and passed it around. The fact that we still have it today indicates that it was something that was meaningful to them, which means that they understood it. Okay, so talked about comparative words. We've talked about colors. We've talked about signs. We've talked about symbols. What about numbers? In our culture today, numbers have a powerful symbolic function. Here are a few examples. The winning sports team holds up one finger. We all know what that means. It means they're number one. Okay? But a second grader who's had too much juice to drink holding up one finger, same image, but it doesn't mean I'm number one. It means I got to go. Got to go potty. Got to go number one. But if you have a patient in the hospital that asks for a bedpan and holds up two fingers, okay, they're not saying I'm number two. They're not saying second place. They're saying I got to go number two. Okay? But a different image, take this back, 50 years ago, 55 years ago, hippies in the 70s over in America holding up two fingers. It doesn't mean they have to go to the bathroom. It means peace. Same image. The joke that I like to say is that a Roman walks into a bar and holds up two fingers and says, 5 beers, please. If you know your Roman numerals, that joke will make sense. Okay. How about this one? Just kind of saying that, oh my gosh, I've waited forever for my food to arrive at the restaurant. That is using a very, very large, expansive description. You've waited forever for like all these years. Really what you just mean is a really, really long time. Okay, so sometimes you could just exaggerate things with numbers and descriptions. Saying that you've been nickeled and dimed, a businessman saying this, doesn't just mean that, little change means that that they're constantly being charged things at such a little rate, but it just keeps adding up in a way that is substantial. So numbers in Revelation also had a specific symbolic rather than literal meaning in the Jewish culture of the first century CE. So the point here is to take the numbers seriously, but numbers in symbolic literature, to take them seriously does not mean to read them literally. I'm going to say that again. When you are interpreting numbers in symbolic literature, to take them seriously does not mean to interpret them literally. It means to recognize that they have a symbolic value, and we need to figure out what that symbolic value means. Okay? So the broad consensus on what these numbers mean are what follows. So 1/3 or 1/2 is just meaning something that's limited in scope or limited in time because it's been cut in third or it's been cut in half. So it's limited. It's not full. 3 seems to just refer to a distinct group. Nothing more specific than that, just something special like a distinct group or something. 3.5 and its parallels would be a limited time because it is half of the number 7. 7 is the number of fullness. Okay, and it's going to specifically recall various times of persecution. because 3.5 years was a very specific time of persecution during the time of Daniel, from the time of 167 to 164, in which there was a persecution involving the Maccabean uprising and the Maccabean War. Okay, so that was a well-known time period in Jewish history. Also, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but I think it also would have been in the minds of Revelation's readers, is that the Jewish war that started in the year 66 and it culminated in the year 70 with the destruction of the temple also lasted for 3.5 years. Also, a time of persecution of the people of God by some sort of foreign, foreign force, foreign nation. Okay. So again, 3.5, half of God's fullness, but also recalling to mind images of persecution. Okay, very important. 4, dealing with creation or universality, like there's 4 corners of the earth or 4 of these various beasts in Revelation chapter 4, just kind of describing the fullness of creation. 6 is imperfect because it's 1 short of 7. That's how it works. So 666 is just a multiplication of like imperfect, imperfect, imperfect. It's not 1 extra from 665. So that's something to consider. 7, of course, is the number of fullness and perfection. We know this because creation was made in 7 days, and then everything was very, very good. 7 being a number of perfection. You can see that in the Old Testament, even in some of the literature, like the Book of Psalms, stuff like that. 12 and its multiples, representative of the fullness of God's people. So, of course, you're thinking 12 tribes, 12 apostles. So 12 is just a well-known number indicating the fullness of God's purposes, the fullness of God's people. And it's not just going to be 12, it's going to be multiples. So 144 is 12 times 12. 144,000 is also multiples of 12. Okay. Unfortunately, 144,000 is a multiple of 12, and it's also a multiple of 1,000. So it also deals with this. 1,000 is just basically a large number with enhanced symbolism in multiples. So, of course, multiple thousands is just going to enhance that symbolism in a variety of ways. So don't just look for the number 1,000. 12,000 is just 1,000 blending in the imagery of the number 12. Okay. Good commentaries on Revelation will tell you the exact same thing. None of these definitions are my definitions. This is what the experts on Revelation have come to a consensus on. And again, just plug these in when you read them in Revelation and see if it makes sense with the passage. And I think that you're going to find that it does. Okay, so Revelation is going to draw from its own pool of scriptural images. So unlike Daniel, Revelation draws upon a pool of images from the Old Testament to convey the contents of its vision. However, it's a really important part. Over 99% of these allusions are without a direct quote from the Old Testament. So if you are unfamiliar with the Old Testament, you're going to miss what John is saying. Whether he does a quote, whether he does an allusion, whether he does an echo, and those are actually all 3 different ways of drawing on the Old Testament. But it's not going to say, this was written to fulfill what was said in Hosea, like the Gospel of Matthew does, or this is according to what, this author says, like Isaiah said. Revelation is not going to tell you that. It's just going to use it and assume that you were able to follow the allusion. So you got to make sure that we know our Old Testament really well. Another point about John's use of the Old Testament is that he regularly disregards the original context of the quote in the image as he reapplies it to further enhance his own agenda. Really important. So I talked about how John is going to use the Old Testament a lot. But when he does, he very often rips that allusion or that passage out of its context and puts it in a brand new context in the book of Revelation. So it's not good enough for us as readers to recognize, oh, John is quoting from Daniel here. It's saying, okay, how is John using this quote for his own purposes and not just assuming by default that the understanding from Daniel is the way that we have to interpret it in Revelation? That's where a lot of people get tripped up, is that they don't see that Revelation reuses this imagery because it's inspired by God and it can be useful for new purposes. So I'm going to give you the best example to prove this point. Easiest example. So in Daniel chapter 7, we have the image of 4 beasts. Four beasts were coming up out of the sea. Again, from what you already know, coming up out of the sea, that is a negative image. Different from one another. The first was like a lion with wings of an eagle. I kept looking, the wings were plucked, lifted from the ground, made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was given to it. And behold, another beast, the second one, resembling a bear, raised on one side, 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth, and thus they said to it, arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast of it had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Okay, so here it just actually tells us the first 3 of these beasts. Okay, so the descriptions are, we have a lion, we have a bear, and we have a leopard. But the leopard has 4 heads. Okay, now look in Revelation, chapter 13, verses 1 through 2. The dragon stood on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. So how many beasts? 1. Okay. Having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on his horns were 10 diadems. On his heads were blasphemous names. The beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. So you can see that comparative language, like. So what Revelation's actually done, and we actually didn't read this in Daniel, because in Daniel it's going to have a 4th beast that has 10 horns. What Revelation does is it takes the 4 beasts of Daniel, and it combines all of their features, combines all of their heads, and it combines all of their horns into a completely different beast. And it says, look, it's got all of the heads like the 4 beasts of Daniel. It's like a leopard, it's like a bear, and it's like a lion. So Revelation's using Daniel, but it is ripping Daniel out of its context and using it for a brand new purpose. So the understanding of Daniel is not the foundation for understanding Revelation, because Revelation is doing something completely brand new. Obviously, it's not quoting Daniel and using it to say, well, Daniel tells us what's going on in Revelation. Daniel has kind of the pool of images, no pun intended, because this is all coming out of the sea. But Revelation is taking it, using it for a brand new purpose, talking about a brand new beast that has all of the evil qualities of these former 4 beasts. That's really important. Okay, this is a good example, a very clear and easy example you could show somebody to show that Revelation does use the Old Testament, but he uses the Old Testament for brand new purposes. It's not copy-paste. Okay, the book of Revelation often interprets itself. And so when the book of Revelation interprets itself, we need to take that seriously, because it's going to give you the answers. They're going to give you the answers for the test. Okay? So this is not an exhaustive list. This is just like all that I can fit onto one slide. So in chapter 1, verse 20, it says the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. Easy enough. The 7 lampstands, they are the 7 churches. Again, we don't have to ask. We don't have to debate this. He tells you and interprets what it means. He actually reveals it to us. Chapter 5, verse 8. When he had taken the book, and the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each one holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense. What are the bowls of incense? They are the prayers of the saints. So you have this incense that's going up to God, but it's not really incense. It's sacrificial imagery, but really it's the prayers of the saints. He tells you what that means. Okay? All right. In chapter 12, verse 9, the great dragon was thrown down, by the way, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. So he's telling you, hey, we got a great fiery dragon. It's the serpent of old, the devil, and Satan. Okay, so again, telling you exactly what that image means. We've already read this one in chapter 17, verse 9. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Again, an image that would have been very apparent to the original readers. At the end of chapter 17, the woman which you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Okay, so what city in the 1st century currently reigned over the kings of the earth? And the answer is obviously Rome. That's the only thing that fits into it. It's not Jerusalem. Definitely would have been Jerusalem at the time that Revelation was written. You know, after it had been, its temple had been destroyed, and a lot of people had left it. Again, it's just, this is an obvious thing right here. I want you to notice, by the way, here, that in chapter 17, you have a woman that's described as a city. I want you to remember that. A woman is described as a city. And this is a negative woman, and it's a bad city. Because later in Revelation, in chapter 21 and 22, you're going to have another woman described as a city. And it's a positive woman, and it's a positive city. Okay? But here, this woman, this person, I mean, the identity of the woman, well, I mean, we have to contrast it with the other. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Okay, so we'll move ahead. Okay, here in chapter 19. Let us rejoice and be glad and give glory to him, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride, that's another positive woman, has made herself ready. It was given to her to clothe herself in fine linen, bright and clean, for the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. Okay? So the clothing that we're supposed to wear, we've already seen in Sardis that they're clothed with white because they're worthy. So here we're seeing the clothing that you, if you consider yourself the bride of Christ, the bright and clean clothing, okay? It's not really going to the store and buying white robes. The clothing that you're wearing, they are the righteous acts of the saints. They are the good new covenant deeds, the good works of God's people. You are clothed with positive good works. Revelation's all about doing good works. Chapter 20, verse 14, death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. So is the lake of fire burning forever and ever so that there's no death? No, the lake of fire is dying a second time. This is the second death. It's so obvious, but again, people just read over it. They don't take it seriously. The lake of fire is not really a lake on fire, because a body of water is not something that can be lit on fire. The lake of fire is dying a second time. It's the second death. Again, just very simple. Okay. And then chapter 21, verse 2, another passage that people just read over very quickly. I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. So which is it? Is it a city or is it a woman? Which one is it? Oh, wait a minute. I've already seen a city that's a woman back in chapter 17 and chapter 18 and chapter 19. Now I've got a new city that's also a woman. But I know who the bride of Christ is. That's me. Or at least I'm a member of it. I'm a member of the church, the early church. So here we're seeing a different woman, a beautiful woman, contrasting the terrible woman of chapter 17. And both of them are described as cities. Okay? One of them is a city that is built on waters, and there is a city that is coming out of heaven. It's the heavenly Jerusalem. But notice the city is a bride. And we know what the bride is because that's a common New Testament image from Paul and Gospel John and elsewhere. Okay? So the point is, when the book of Revelation interprets itself, you've got to take that seriously because he's just giving you the answers, and we have to plug those in and do well with them. Okay? So, all right. Final tips. I know we're going long. We're at 58 minutes. All this is so good. All this is so important. Okay. So if you've kind of skipped to the end, this is what I would say would be the most important things that I want you to walk away with. The 4 tips to successfully interpreting the book of Revelation. Number 1, John of Patmos wants to present his readers as a beautiful bride of Christ, adorned in righteous and faithful works. So read Revelation in a way that picks up on the ways that it encourages good works. That's my tip. Number 2, Revelation is aware that Christians can become compromised with idolatrous worship, compromised with accommodation with the unredeemed culture, and compromised with stagnation, as in like they're just Christians, but they're not doing anything. They're there. They're not doing good works. They're not being faithful witnesses. They're there. So you need to read Revelation in a way that takes note of these warning signs, and not just the warning signs, but the punishments that's going to follow those who refuse to repent from them. Meaning, Revelation is going to motivate you out of stagnation, accommodation, and false worship so that you can be the faithful bride and adorn yourself with righteous and faithful works. Number 3, Revelation summons its readers to conquer and overcome in the very same way that Christ conquered. This means that Jesus serves as the example of how Revelation expects its readers to live. It's a book of discipleship. So, read Revelation in a way that pays careful attention to the deeds of Jesus. Very careful. Lastly, Revelation devotes its largest argument from chapters 17 all the way to 22 by contrasting two women, each represented by a city. The first woman is a harlot, and Revelation summons its readers to, quote, come out of her, my people. Get away from this woman. Get away from this city. Get out of her. The second woman is the bride of Christ, the heavenly Jerusalem, and Revelation summons its readers to, quote, wash their robes so that they have the right to the tree of life and they may enter by the gates of the city. Again, how do we wash our robes? Revelation tells us in chapter 7 that you wash your robes in the blood of Jesus, and your robes are white by doing faithful, good, righteous, new covenant works. So you need to reject the former, reject the woman, the harlot, and embrace the latter woman. Embrace the bride of Christ, which is the identity of the believers. Those are my tips. And I think if you go to Revelation, you read it with that insight, that will actually help you to make good sense of it. So thank you for watching. Take care. And hopefully you've enjoyed this long, ongoing session on how to interpret the Bible through hermeneutics.